You know what's weird? How much you see swords in fiction. Sure, a hero could use any other weapon, and a lot of them do, but when you think of the archetypal storybook hero, they're wielding a sword. The Master Sword, Anduril, Excalibur, Dragon Slayer, the Buster Sword, the Sword of Omens, any of the billion named swords in Song of Ice and Fire, it's pretty much the default fantasy weapon. Which is weird because swords aren't really weapons anymore. Plenty of people still use swords every day as art objects and collector's items and sporting equipment. But in the age of guns, why would you ever practically use a sword? What is it about this weapon that is no longer a weapon that has people so obsessed? What has the sword become? Okay, it's one thing to talk about cool fantasy swords, it's another to write a whole world that they belong in. If that's what you're trying to do, then I think I have something a little bit better than this video for you. A class called Creating Unique and Powerful Worlds, taught by many-time author and professor of fiction, Lincoln Michel. Click the link in the description to get started for free. A big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. More on that later. The Master Sword from Legend of Zelda isn't exactly what I would call realistic. If you look at its dimensions, it doesn't really seem like it would be functional as a sword. That chisel edge, the thick blade, the massive crossguard. It can also, shoot laser beams. It houses a sentient being. It can open portals to the sacred realm. It is undeniably a very cool sword. It's just ridiculously fantastical, too. There is almost nothing real about this sword. Which is not really that strange. It's barely even worth pointing out on its own. This is just kind of how swords are in fantasy. Most of the time they have these over-the-top abilities and designs that make them dysfunctional, if not outright impossible, in real life. I've seen some swords in anime that are so oversized and so covered in spikes or flames or flourishes that you kind of have to squint to even recognize that they are swords at all. The Keyblade in Kingdom Hearts is, it's a key. It's literally just a giant key. These designs stretch the idea of a sword as a weapon almost to its absolute limit. The very idea of a sword has itself become sort of ridiculously fantastical. So fantastical, in fact, that when Link uses the Master Sword to slay enemies like Stalfos and Bokoblins, it's hard to even think of what he's doing as violence. The Zelda games don't really ask us to consider the realistic implications of stabbing countless enemies to death with a sword. They just ask us to save the world. It's pure fantasy. And I like that about Zelda. I wouldn't want it to become some kind of think piece on the morality of violence. When I watch Pirates of the Caribbean or Lord of the Rings, I'm not thinking about all of that. I'm thinking of swashbuckling adventures, fairy tales, witty one-liners, ridiculous amounts of roguish flinning. It's fun to watch Wesley and Inigo Montoya chatter their way through a duel. I love obliterating guardians with sword beams in Breath of the Wild. Even in the grittier, gorier works like Game of Thrones or Dark Souls, we know we're not seeing real blood or viscera. We're seeing practical effects and computer imagery. No killing blow is that tidy, no sword moves that quickly or cleanly through that much armor. In fiction, swords are fun because they're fantastical. The aesthetics of the sword are definitely part of that fantasy. The image, the symbol of the sword itself does matter. It just wouldn't feel the same if Link was wandering around Hyrule with, the Master Glock or something. But the larger part of the fantasy seems to be what the sword does here. Its utility. From its origin as a lethal weapon that solves problems quickly, it's become a fantasy icon for solving all problems quickly. Which really makes it more like a magic wand. This pretty thing you swing around at whatever's bothering you, and then poof, it's gone. In fantasy, it doesn't really need to be any deeper than that. The world is full of difficult problems. Everyone has issues in their lives that seem too big or too complicated to handle. On a conceptual level, stabbing the evil overlord in the heart is actually a lot easier than doing homework or paying off loans or getting involved in local politics. If only real life were so tidy. This is Regal Bones. As you can see from her Twitter page, she really, really likes swords. Really likes them. Jeez. The fun thing about her swords is that they sort of embrace this idea of not really being swords. In fact, the word I'd use to describe a lot of these swords is, counterintuitively, cozy. There's little to no blood, almost no depictions of actual combat. You don't kill people with these swords. That's not what they're for. Look, this one is also a teapot. A teapot. It's a sword, and also the antithesis of a sword. A sword that comforts. I don't know if she meant her cute tea sword to be that conceptually deep, but there it is. The thing I love most about her art is how earnest it is. I think it reflects how people really think of swords these days. Not the fantasy of them, but the actual relationship their owners and admirers have with them. Swords are art, collector's items, sporting equipment. When fencers, Kindurka, and Hema enthusiasts train with swords, they're not doing it for love of violence. They're doing it for love of the skill involved. In fact, they generally take strict precaution to avoid any injury. It seems a little counterintuitive when you think about it, doesn't it? If you don't want to be violent, why pick a weapon for all of these activities and art pieces? And of all weapons, why choose what is perhaps the most violence-oriented in ancient history? A bow can be used for hunting. A knife can be used for cooking. Axes are usually meant to cut down trees. Swords? They only do one thing well. A sword is, on the most utilitarian level, a wedge of metal designed to cut human flesh. That's what it does. It is a tool made for the express purpose of violence. Warfare, dueling, execution, blood sport, murder. Even if you're not using it for any of those things, that history has imbued the sword with a sort of symbolic status. Laws were created, and swords upheld them. Domains were established, and swords defended them. Enemies were proclaimed, and swords vanquished them. Not just swords, obviously, but the sword, as a pure symbol of wieldable and willful violence, was pervasive for centuries. When kings and soldiers carried them, it was understood that their authority came, ultimately, from their ability and willingness to wield that power. Even now, naval officers wear swords on their belts. Crests and flags are still designed with swords emblazoned on them. There's some room for debate about honor here on whether a person who wields power well is better than someone who doesn't wield it at all, but that's a topic for a different video. For now, suffice it to say that the sword was originally a symbol, perhaps the symbol, of domination. It was the tool that ended conflict swiftly and easily, if you personally were willing to wield it. I think that history is pretty hard to disentangle from the sword's identity. No matter how far removed from real-world violence, how pretty the design, how benign the application, a sword is still a sword. It still calls back to that domineering history, that original use case of exerting one's will over the world around them. Which, I think, is exactly what makes the sword's new identity so appealing. I think there's a reason Regal Bones chooses swords. I mean, she could be applying this treatment to anything, but what happens when you accept what the sword means and then apply it in a different way? When your mechanism for exerting your will on the world around you isn't violence or domination, but expression. Art that will change perspectives, sport that will change your body. If your enemy is stress or burnout, maybe the sword you need is indeed a teapot. In the words of the artist herself, a sword is sometimes everything but a sword. I like that sentiment. I don't think everyone who loves swords will like what I've been saying throughout this video, actually. As I've been researching this topic and generally navigating the world of fiction, I've noticed a sort of interesting philosophy in some circles regarding all of this. A sort of romance or aggrandization of the old sword. This idea that it was better as a weapon, that maybe it should go back to being a weapon. Has it ever occurred to you, Master Nine Fingers, that a sword is different from other weapons? Axes and maces and so forth are lethal enough, but they hang on the belt like dumb brutes. But a sword has a voice. Sheathed, it has little to say, to be sure, but you only need to put your hand on the hilt, and it begins to whisper in your enemy's ear. A gentle word, a word of caution. Do you hear it? Now, compare it to the sword half drawn. It speaks louder, does it not? It hisses a dire threat. It makes a deadly promise. Do you hear it? Now, compare it to the sword full drawn. It shouts now, does it not? It screams defiance. It bellows a challenge. Do you hear it? This is a quote from Joe Abercrombie's The Blade itself. Now, this is not a reckoning on the book or the author's intentions or anything like that, but when I read this, it strikes me differently from the other sword art we've discussed. It doesn't appear to be concerned with any personalized or subversive application. This quote is, as the book's title implies, concerned with the blade itself. The argument, buried within all this poetic language, seems to be that the sword is somehow a good tool for violence. Not just effective in that role, but beautiful, more refined, more elegant than other weapons. It seems to be saying that a sword's violence can be desirable. That a sword makes it so. It's almost a reclamation of the old sword concept, a romance for the sword's symbolic ancestry. On the one hand, I think this has pretty much endured for as long as the sword. On the other, it's hard not to feel like this is a bit of a reflex to the sword's trajectory, a rejection of the sword as anything but a sword. There are loads of videos and articles and Reddit threads critiquing fantasy sword design, often with the implicit caveat that fantasy is fantasy and should do what is appropriate for the story. But while arguing for realism, discussing the appropriate thickness and weight and balance of the blade, it's hard to ignore the fact that you're also arguing for utility. And we've already discussed what that means for swords. Remember, there's only one thing a sword is truly good at. If the new concept of the sword, the one we see in the art of regal bones and in so much modern media, embraces the symbolic will inherent to wielding a sword, but rejects the violence, then what does it mean to dispute that concept and reclaim the old one? Is that a rejection of the rejection of violence? When you long for swords to be weapons again, are you also longing for a return to violence? Is this a signal that you prefer violence as a swift solution to most problems? I don't think I can really offer a definitive verdict on that. I just worry sometimes about this romantic sentiment, that the beauty and romance of swords cuts the other way, too. There seems to be this anguished longing for a world that never really existed. One where might made right, and all that one ever need do was devote themselves fully to the blade, or something. Of course, despite the original use case of the sword and how easy it is to look at history through rose-tinted lenses, violence has always been complicated. There was never a time in history where violence didn't create at least as many problems as it solved, whether practically for the people engaging in it, or hundreds of years later for the people reckoning with its fallout. The idea that violence truly is a simpler and more efficient way to solve problems is itself a wishful fantasy. In a way, it really is the dark mirror image of the fantasy I've been describing throughout this video. Actually, when I first started researching this, I really thought that would be the prevailing sentiment. I thought the ultimate conclusion I would come to would be that no matter how you dress it up, this obsession people have with swords would ultimately come down to an obsession with violence. This time, I'm thrilled to be proven wrong. For the most part, from what I've seen, people just don't seem to see swords in that way anymore. When a sword is actually used as a real weapon, it turns into a comedic news story. Media that features swords tends not to emphasize the violence, and when it does, it's subversive and critical. Viewers will just roll with the idea of a sword, no matter how unsword-like it really is. There is something so far beyond the ability to spill blood that makes swords irresistible. And I think I kind of get it now. If the sword has always been the symbol of changing the world through sheer personal force of will, I mean, violence aside, that's kind of a great thing to have a shorthand for. Who doesn't want things to be that simple? Who doesn't want to wield their willpower in their own two hands and just fix things? The real fantasy here is a world where, when you put in the effort and you show the bravery and you willingly wield the tools to solve the problems which face you, you win. That those things are enough. When Regal Bone says a sword is sometimes everything but a sword, she's saying that the weapon you need isn't always obvious. But it's nice to imagine that there is one, and that you can wield it. You know, some of the most iconic swords in fantasy aren't just cool because of their designs or their abilities, they're cool because of how deeply they're connected to their world building. It's always a breathtaking moment when you get your hands on the Master Sword in the Zelda games because you've come to learn the role this sword plays in the story. Its connection to the land of Hyrule and its mythology make it more than just a weapon. In the games, it's a legend, a part of history that you are entrusted with. World building can be a little intimidating, though. I mean, there's just so much to consider when you're crafting an entire fantasy world. Today's sponsor, Skillshare, can help you with that. You've probably heard about Skillshare before. It's the world's largest learning community for creatives and features classes on everything from art and music to content creation and writing. If you want to learn how to world build, they have a class for that too. Link and Michelle's Creating Unique and Powerful Worlds class. Michelle, a many-time author and writing professor, does a great job explaining just how much world building can influence the rest of your writing. It can shape your characters' personalities, the plot, even the themes of your story. It's surprising how much easier it gets once you establish that initial ripple effect, as he puts it. I'll admit that sometimes it can be easy to dismiss world building as just a filler, sort of backdrop for the action. Michel certainly doesn't see it this way. He positions world building as the beating heart of the story, something that can enrich your entire narrative, which honestly makes me way more excited to really get into it myself. The first 500 people who use our link will get Link and Michelle's course and everything else Skillshare has to offer for free. 1 whole month of Skillshare. That's an awful lot of learning. And those 500 slots are going to fill up fast, so I'd definitely hurry. Again, click the link in the description to get started for free. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!